Well, Ashley Benefield's verdict came in late last night. The jury was deliberating late into the night, which they have the choice to do, and that's what they decided to do. And they came to a verdict. But first, they had some questions for the judge, some notes that they sent to the judge. So before we jump into the actual verdict, let's talk about the note, the first note that they sent to the judge, which I think is very interesting. And I think that there's a very important lesson to be learned from this note. So let's get up the note where they came into the judge. And here we go.
And you've been called back because there's a jury question. And I'm going to read the question, and if either side wants to approach and look at it yourselves, you sure can. I'm going to read it as it is. Dr. Quintella testimony. Defense recall. Was his description with Doug based on his observation or what Ashley told him, i.e., domineering, super controlling, alpha male, over the top, not genuine?
So, interesting question by the jury. They want to know that Dr. Quintel, when he came to this conclusion that Doug was all of those things, domineering, controlling, was that just based on what Ashley Benefield told Dr. Quintel, or was it from Dr. Quintel's personal observations and conversations with Doug Benefield? So it seems that in the jury, they're in the jury room in the deliberations, they're trying to figure out, well, is there any sort of independent evidence other than Ashley Benefield that Doug was actually an abusive type of person? Now, remember, there was some text messages between Renee, his previous wife, Doug's previous wife, and Doug, which detail some abuse. So what was the jury thinking about that? Was that not enough? Did they also want to hear about Dr. Quintel, or maybe they just simply forgot about those text messages? So that is a question that we can all be wondering, but certainly they wanted to hear from this doctor, who's a professional, mental health professional, whether this was actually a personal observation or just essentially hearsay from Ashley Benefield. So if you will recall, let's play the prosecutor's closing argument, because this also is most likely where the confusion is coming from. So let's pull up. Here we go.
Other than he thought all those things he conceded that they were all based on what Ashley told him, not based on anything he observed. He conceded that.
Well, there you have it from the prosecutor's voice herself during her closing argument. That's the rebuttal, by the way. There was a closing argument. The prosecution went first, then the defense went second, and now they get a rebuttal. And here in the rebuttal, she's saying that all of Dr. Quintel's conclusions were based on what Ashley Benefield told him. So now you can understand why the jury is a little confused now. Did Dr. Quintel come to these conclusions based only on Ashley Benefield's conversations with him and her reporting of what he was doing? Or was it actually from his personal, Dr. Quintel's personal observations and conversations with Doug Benefield? And the prosecutor said straight out, he conceded, Dr. Quintel conceded that it was just from Ashley Benefield. Well, is that true or not? So let's take a look at actually what Dr. Quintel testified to.
Did you reach any conclusions with respect to Douglas Benefield?
Yes.
Would you tell us what those were?
Based on the conversations with both Ashley and Doug, Doug occurred as someone who was domineering, and the terminology that I would use at times would be super controlling. He was very dedicated to.
Okay, so there you have it. Dear actually, Dr. Quintel said that based on his conversations with both Ashley Benefield and Doug Benefield. So this was actually observations that he had himself of Doug Benefield. It wasn't just Ashley Benefield telling him that. So the prosecutor absolutely got that wrong and represented to the jury something that is incorrect. Now, that could have prompted an objection by the defense attorney at the table saying, hey, Your Honor, that is not what the evidence was. And as a lawyer, you're not allowed to change what the evidence is. You can explain evidence, you can argue the evidence, but you can't change the evidence. And here you have the prosecutor saying that no, it was just from Ashley Benefield. And you see clearly from Dr. Quintel's testimony himself, it was actually his observations from his personal observations and his conversations with Doug. So that could have prompted an objection. It didn't. And the question is, well, now, is that anyway going to be something that they can appeal, that the prosecutor is not allowed to do that? So that will be an interesting part of the appeal, which most likely will happen now because she's already convicted. But that was an interesting part. Now, what there is to learn from that is why it's so important and strategic when you go last, when you're the last ones talking to the jury. You're the lawyer, you're the last one being able to talk to the jury about the evidence. It really, really makes an impression on the jury. And that just makes your job that much more important. When you get the last word, you make sure that you can really knock home your case. And we see it straight out in this situation. Now, what the judge did, the judge asked, when he got that first note, he asked the lawyers what they want to do about the note. And the defense attorney, realizing this, he said, well, you should play back the testimony of Dr. Quintel. They obviously have a question about what he testified to, so you should read it back to them. And the prosecution obviously said, no, you shouldn't read it back to them. Just tell them that we are not allowed to tell you the answer to that question. That's something that you have to rely on your memory, or it's something that you're asking us that we cannot do. And that's essentially what the judge did. The judge essentially did. He read from what you're supposed to tell the jury when they ask these types of questions. Now, do I think the judge made the wrong decision? No, I think the judge made the right decision. But as a juror, if you're ever on a jury, you have the right to hear some testimony read back to you. And that happens in a lot of cases, a number of cases. When the jury's deliberating, they want to rehear some testimony, they can certainly ask for that. So if the jury wanted to ask to have Dr. Quintel's testimony read back, they could have done that. They could have asked that question. But since they didn't ask that specific question, they were just asking a factual question. So then you tell the jury, this is your job. It's not our job. Now, he didn't even say to the jury, well, if you want, you can send a note to ask us to replay the deposition, replay his testimony. That the judge didn't do, and he's not required to do that. But that's an interesting area where the jurors would have went back to that jury room and said, well, we're not sure. They could have sent out another note. And something about this, the fact that they're staying late, just strikes me a little bit as they really wanted to reach a verdict by the end of the day. They didn't want to come back. Or maybe one or two people really didn't want to come back. And maybe that's what was the driving force about deliberating so late into the night. It seems that they really didn't want to come back. And it could be that, and again, nobody knows, but it could be that they just didn't want to make sure about certain things, certain parts of the evidence, to make sure that their verdict is the right verdict. Kind of makes you question a little bit their approach to the deliberations. Now, of course, I'm not saying that I know anything, but these are some clues that could lend one to believe that they really wanted to reach a verdict that night. And it was already late. And when it gets late, people aren't always thinking so clearly. And, but that's what they wanted to do. So I'm not going to sit here and cast doubt onto their deliberations and say that this wasn't absolutely clear in their minds, that this was the absolute verdict that they wanted to come to. But I can't say that if people are questioning about whether they were really being very careful about the evidence, especially when you have this type of question come out, and they could have the testimony read back and they could have sent out a note for that, and they didn't want to bother with that. I can't blame the people that are wondering about whether this was a little bit of a quick deliberations. All right. So now let's move on. There was another note that came in to the judge, and that was that actually they can't reach a unanimous verdict. So they sent out another note saying we can't reach a unanimous verdict. So the judge asked, what do you want to do now? So the defense attorney said, very simple. It's only been a few hours. Send them back. Say they got to continue deliberating. And the prosecution said, well, maybe we should read them the Allen charge. Now we know that the Allen charge, once you read the Allen charge, it's only a one trick pony with the Allen charge. And then after that, if they come back and they say that they can't reach a unanimous verdict, you got to issue a mistrial or declare a mistrial. And therefore, the judge wasn't so quick to issue the Allen charge. So he sent them back and said, okay, continue deliberating, or maybe if you want to come back tomorrow morning, that's fine. Also, the judge did nothing wrong here, by the way. The judge was completely perfect with how he handled, I believe, these questions and these notes and the proper rulings. So the jury went back, and after they sent out that note, about 45 minutes later, after they sent out that note that they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, they come back with a verdict, and the verdict is guilty on manslaughter. Okay, so now let's try to put ourselves into the jury deliberations and try to think about how the deliberations could have gone. Now, of course, nobody knows, but I just want to run through this exercise with you because I think it raises some questions. So let's remember, what is manslaughter? Manslaughter is a relatively simple elements. Number one, that Doug Benefield is dead. Okay, that's clear. Number two is that Ashley Benefield intentionally committed an act or acts that caused the death of Doug Benefield. Well, she definitely did that. There's no question about that. She shot him. And then that's it. You're done with manslaughter. However, it continues a little bit more. And it says like this: in order to convict of manslaughter by act, it is not necessary for the state to prove that the defendant had an intent to cause death, only an intent to commit an act that was not merely negligent, justified, or excusable, and which caused death. So it can't be a justified act. That's an important part. Obviously, if somebody is murdered as a result of self-defense, or if there's another justifiable reason for using deadly force, then obviously you cannot convict them on manslaughter either. It's not just self-defense works on second-degree murder. Self-defense also works on manslaughter. So here, they're coming back saying that it was not justified for Ashley Benefield to use deadly force on Doug Benefield. So let's just examine that for a minute, okay? Let's just put ourselves in the jury room for a second, in the deliberations. And of course, we don't know what goes on there, but I just want to run through this exercise because this is just logical in my mind. First, they talk about second-degree murder, right? You assume that the first thing that they're talking about is second-degree murder. Now, the big problem with coming back with a conviction on second-degree murder is that there has to be an evidence of a depraved heart or mind. So that means that Ashley Benefield acted with a depraved heart or mind. Well, what it would be evidence of Ashley Benefield acting with a depraved heart or mind? Well, there's a number of different options. Ill will, hatred, spite, or evil intent. If she exhibited ill will, hatred, spite, evil intent, then that would be considered a depraved heart, and you can find her guilty on second-degree murder. So that means if the jury said, we all agree that she did not commit second-degree murder, that means that the jury found that there was no ill will, there was no hatred, there was no spite, and there was no evil intent. Well, if that's true, let's move on. And then the question is going to become, then why did she do it? Why did she pull the trigger? Why did she shoot him? It wasn't out of ill will, right? If it was, then the jury would have found her guilty on second-degree murder. So if it wasn't ill will, it wasn't hatred, it wasn't spite, why did she pull that trigger? Now, there doesn't have to be a reason. If somebody just wants to go on a shooting spree, then yeah, sure. You don't have to think about you don't have to have any ill will towards this specific individual to shoot him. You just decided to shoot inside a house. And that would be manslaughter. So is that what happened? That she just didn't think about anything and she just shot him without having any sort of feelings? I don't think the jury would would come to that conclusion, right? I think that's reasonable. This is not a person, from what we've seen, that would just shoot for someone for no reason. So then what was the reason? Well, then the next logical step would be that there was some sort of disagreement. There was some sort of argument. So then let's take that to the next step. So now, what type of argument is going to cause Ashley Benefield to use deadly force on Doug? Again, remember, you can't say that there's hatred, you can't say that there's ill will here, and you can't say that there's evil intent. So what would cause her to use deadly force? So then let's move it up. It must be that it wasn't just a simple disagreement. It must have been that there's something more escalating than a simple disagreement. And now that we're buying that, how do you get to that? How would you come to the conclusion that there was anything more than a simple disagreement? You have to then believe somewhat Ashley Benefield when she testified about what was going on. Because there's no other evidence that there was anything more than just moving boxes together and maybe being tired at the end of the day. So what was the cause? Why did she shoot Doug Benefield? And this is, I think, how the deliberations should have played out. Again, I wasn't there, but I'm just kind of logically going through the steps. If there's no ill will, there's no hatred, there's no spite, they must have gotten into some sort of disagreement, some sort of argument that would cause Ashley Benefield to actually pull out a gun and shoot him. So once we believe that there was some sort of, and again, you're not allowed to speculate. You're not supposed to speculate. Everything has to be based on some evidence. And here, the only evidence that there was anything more than just moving boxes was Ashley Benefield's testimony. So that means that the jury is buying some of Ashley Benefield's testimony. Well, then the question is, well, at what point do you believe her and what point do you not believe her? If you believe that there's something more than just moving boxes and there was some sort of situation which she felt scared in, then how can you for sure say, well, we're only going to believe her that there was something was escalating, but not anything more? That's what you have to essentially conclude. And then remember that the jury instructions, and this is the law in Florida, that if Doug Benefield was committing a forcible felony, even if Ashley Benefield's life was not at risk, she was still allowed to use deadly force. This was her house. In her house, if he's refusing to leave and closing the door, and that's how things are escalating, or if he's attempting a burglary or house imprisonment or in aggravated assault, then that would be enough justifiable reason for Ashley Benefield to use deadly force. So the problem that I have, just logically, with how the jury came to vote guilty on manslaughter is that if you run through the logical steps, it doesn't seem to add up, because you have to either speculate, and because if you completely discount Ashley Benefield's testimony, then you're completely speculating about what happened in that house. If you are agreeing with some things that Ashley Benefield said, so then how do you draw the line about what she was saying the truth about, what she wasn't saying the truth about? And even if you say that we're not going to believe that he was going to actually kill her, what about those other forcible felonies? If things were escalating, then isn't that reasonable doubt maybe that he was committing a burglary, or maybe false imprisonment, or maybe an aggravated assault? So manslaughter, to me, I don't think logically adds up if we plug it into this scenario, which is why it seems to me that this was just a compromise, and the jurors just wanted to get out of there, and therefore they compromised and they said, okay, some of us feel that she's completely innocent. Some people want to convict her of second-degree murder. Let's just compromise on manslaughter, even though technically it doesn't make so much sense. That's what I'm saying. So that's my take on this verdict. And now, what is Ashley facing? Well, Ashley now is facing 11 and a half to 30 years in prison. The maximum here is 30 years because it was manslaughter with a firearm. So the maximum is 30 years, and the minimum for the guidelines is 11 and a half years. And if you're the prosecution, I think that you should be happy with this outcome, because I think, as I've said, there was definitely what to hang your hat on to find reasonable doubt, I believe. Again, if you completely discount everything that Ashley Benefield testified to, and you say that she wasn't saying the truth at all, so then it'll be much easier to convict her. But once you start allowing her testimony to sway you and say that there's some credibility there, well, then you're going to have to be stuck with reasonable doubt, whether she acted in self-defense. So that's why I think it would be very interesting to see or hear how the deliberations played out in this case, to see how the logic adds up. Because I think that there's a problem here with the logic, how this results in involuntary, in the manslaughter conviction. So this is always could be an issue with lesser included, that you're concentrating the whole trial on second degree murder. You're not really thinking so much about the lesser included. And then in the jury room, this can happen where you just compromise and you say, okay, let's just be done for the night. Let's not come back tomorrow. Everyone will be a winner in this case, but really no one's a winner. I mean, Ashley's not a winner. She's facing 30 years. And I don't know if the jury understood this. It could be some of the jurors that felt that they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict because they felt that she was completely innocent. Maybe if they'd realized, oh, by the way, now she's facing 30 years, maybe they wouldn't be so quick to compromise on this. Maybe they thought, well, second degree murder is terrible. Manslaughter, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years. But maybe if they would know that, then maybe it would change their opinion about this. But again, as the jury, you're not supposed to think about what the penalty is. You're just supposed to be thinking about what the crime is. That's not your job, really, at this stage of the trial. Certainly not at this stage of the trial. So that's why I think that this verdict is really interesting. And I'd like to hear some more thoughts about this verdict, how they came to a manslaughter over second degree murder. Because again, like once you discount the evil intent, how did this all happen? How did it play out? What do you think happened in there? And tell me that it's not speculation. And once you tell me it's not speculation, the only thing that you can rely on is Ashley Benefield saying that things were escalating in there. And then where do you draw the line? And then how do you tell me for sure that it's not a forcible felony that Doug Benefield was maybe committing at the time, or at least have reasonable doubt about that? So that's my take on this. Not surprised. Nothing surprises me when you're a trial lawyer. Nothing surprises you. You get verdicts all over the place. But if we break these things down logically, that's where we can start having some questions here. All right. Well, that's it for now. Please, if you haven't yet, subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.